Thank you so much for coming today. I'm really excited to be here on what happens to be my inaugural trip to Sacramento, so I'm personally excited. And, we talked about the bigger picture of teacher shortages, but we're going to drill down into the how, the who, and the why. Why is it that there are certain areas that have particularly critical shortages? Why is it so hard to get more and better special ed teachers when we need them really badly? Why is it that despite the really high number of students in California who, don't speak English primarily at home, there's not so many new certified bilingual teachers? So I wanted to first invite Professor Gandara to address the shortage in bilingual education. And, could you tell me a bit about why we have so few of them and why it matters?
What you haven't heard so far about all these shortages is the word language, and that's why I'm here. What I want to point out to you right now is that 43% of all of the children in our schools, or something like 2.6, 2.7 million students, come from homes in which English is not the language spoken. What that means is 2.7 million homes. Parents can't talk to the teacher in most cases. Parents have little communication with the schools. Of that very, very large number, 85% speak Spanish. So this is not an unsolvable problem. But it is a critical problem if I'm always astounded at how we talk about how important it is to have families engaged with the schools and with their children. And yet, with these children, we kind of miss the boat. So, why bilingual teachers in a state that actually has almost banned bilingual education? Because the bilingual teacher informally assesses the student's learning and can adapt the curriculum as a result of having that information, because they can motivate students, especially in the secondary schools. Our research tells us this is the single biggest problem, is motivating these children who are English learners. These teachers can do it because they can communicate, and they oftentimes come from the same backgrounds as the students. Our research tells us that the bilingual teacher feels it is his or her responsibility to reach out to parents. The monolingual teacher feels that it's the parents' responsibility to reach out to them. So parents are more likely to share critical, important information about their children, about what's going on in the home, about the things that are going to affect that child's education with the teacher who is bilingual. And our research shows us that they simply have more pedagogical tools. But take a look at the situation we have in California right now. We have been losing bilingual teachers at an extremely rapid rate. We are not credentialing those teachers in anything like the numbers that we need to, and no doubt because of state policies that put a real damper on this. But we have the resources to fix this. Since 2012, we have had 85,000 recent high school graduates in the state of California graduate with the seal of biliteracy on their diplomas. That is incredible. It's an incredible testament to these kids that in the face of making it so difficult to happen, 85,000 of our high school graduates have a seal of biliteracy that says they are fully proficient in a second language. We can create career pathways, bilingual pathways, to teaching in our high schools. We can recruit classroom aides and school personnel who are now working in this context. We can invite the bilingual teachers that we have who are not certified to complete their certification on scholarship. We can get rid of unnecessary tests like the RICA that no longer aligns with what we're doing in California anyway, that just serves as a barrier. We need to fund fellowships to train the folks who will be training these bilingual teachers in our schools. And we need, relevant to the question about data, We need a census of language and language skills among our teachers. We actually don't know this. We don't know how many teachers we have out there who could be bilingual teachers, who all but for certification, or who are bilingual teachers but are not in the classroom. We don't know the answers to those questions, so I think we do need more data. I'm not going to take up more time because I know we want to move this along. But I do want to remind you that the state of California will have the opportunity once again to revisit the notion of whether we're going to expand dual language bilingual programs in the state. And assuming that we do decide to do that next November, we are going to have a tremendous shortage of teachers in a very, very high demand area. Thanks.
I wanted to ask Lynn a similar question. Why is there such a dire need in special education?
Well, first of all, thank you for calling attention to the dire need in special education, as we heard earlier. I think you'll see it nationally, it's a huge need as well. If you look at data from the National Coalition on personnel shortages in special education, you know that 49 states really suffer in supply and demand around special education. And I think most importantly is something to think about is retention. Teachers that are special educators leave almost double the amount that general ed teachers leave, and I think that's really important to have a good understanding. And as you heard earlier, California is facing around close to 50% of special educators serving in those positions that are underprepared and underqualified for those positions. And of course, this has a great impact on equitable access to teachers for students with disabilities, no surprise there, but then also on the achievement of students with disabilities, both academically and socially, if we don't have enough qualified teachers to serve students with disabilities. I think it's really important to have a good understanding of why teachers leave the profession before we think about the policies and practices that might play an impact or play a good role on improving it. Most particularly in special ed, we know through a number of studies, special ed teachers leave for a host of reasons, but some of them are because of lack of leadership, working conditions, of course, and then there's some very distinct things that I think are important to note for special educators. One is role ambiguity. Not knowing exactly, are they going to serve in a co-teaching classroom, which some we have and some we don't? Are they going to serve as a teacher solely as a segregated classroom, or are they going to serve in a host of different ways? So role ambiguity really plays a large role in why special educators leave. The other reason is that professional isolation. And also when we think about the paperwork requirements, which I'm not so sure that that's ever going to lessen. We've been talking about that since I've been very young. Paperwork requirements are really, really tough as well. So those are the primary reasons that we know they're leaving the profession. And I also think it's important to note that there are a number of studies out there that are really looking at instructional time for special education teachers. And you have to realize many teachers that go into this profession have a desire to work with struggling learners to help them learn, help them improve. And what we're finding is that they're not able to spend much time actually providing instruction. They're spending a lot of their time completing paperwork. And if you're a special ed teacher and you have a desire to really inform and help students with disabilities become successful adults, and you're spending 5 to 10 to 15% of your time on instruction, you're likely not going to stay. And I think it's important, none of those things are a surprise. They're not really all that different for general ed teachers, but it is really important to think about the difference in the distinction in that. So we all say we need a good leader. We heard that earlier from the superintendent, what makes us stay? Good working conditions, good leader, right? But we also need to think about how well is that leader prepared to support students with disabilities or to support the teachers in inclusive environments. So those are things that we really need to think about, and especially role ambiguity, because we train special ed teachers sometimes to meet every need because of the supply and demand, but in that we also make it very difficult for them to be prepared for the various roles that they might assume. And it's really hard to predict what roles they're going to assume. So it's a very difficult situation, and I know in a moment we're going to talk about strategies, which I'll get into in terms of some strategies that have worked, but it is a huge issue. It's shared across the nation, and it isn't one that has been mitigated to any degree lately, and I think there are some strategies and some really promising practices coming forward.
Thanks so much. So yeah, as you mentioned, we are starting with the problems, and we will end later on an optimistic note with the strategies. But I wanted to move over to Assistant Superintendent Mendiola for a second. Now that we know in theory what the numbers are, who is missing here, I wanted you to tell us a little bit about what this looks like in practice from the perspective of someone on the ground. What is a teacher shortage, and what does it feel like?
Everything that's been said so far in that article, we experience probably a little bit more closely, because that's been a trend that we've been struggling with for some time. The district I work for is not unlike other districts that are small, rural communities. 93% of our students are Hispanic, 92% are low income, 36% are English learners or recently redesignated, so basically 72% of our population of 2,289 have been or are English learners. Every year we go through this expectation that we're going to have teachers that are underqualified or underprepared, as explained earlier. This year, at the start of the year, our hire list shows that we've got approximately 20% of our staff that are underprepared, and they're in all areas. Third grade teacher, RSP, 8th grade math, 7th grade history, 6th grade history. These are teachers that have one of the emergency credentials that was highlighted earlier. 7th and 8th grade English, 9th, 10th grade math, general science teacher at the middle school level, PE teacher at the middle school level, music teacher, English teacher at the high school level, another English teacher at the high school level, ag mechanics, 4th grade teacher. We've got ROP classes that we added. We did, through the local control funding formula, restore some programs, but that created an additional demand because music, for example, was so well received, the community wanted more music. So we ended up having to expand that program. The kids do very well. Our superintendent received a national award for bringing the music back to a district like ours, and our Shines program is specific for students with autism at the early intervention level, at the preschool. Our middle school is a school to watch. I say that because I want to celebrate the contributions of our underqualified, underprepared teachers, because what we've had to do is start finding ways to prepare them before they're fully credentialed. A dozen of these teachers are rehired because we have to release them every year. I don't know what else to say about that other than we have to wait till they get fully credentialed. Our transition occurs year-round. It doesn't occur like it used to where people would finish their contracts. Before the winter break, our special ed director accepted a position in a neighboring district closer to her home. We posted mid-year for a special ed director. Fortunately, we had a special ed teacher that was working on an administrative credential. We brought him, but that created an RSP vacancy at the middle school level. We were able to steal somebody from somebody else mid-year, but that district hasn't released them yet. So we're in that cycle of subs that are going to be rotating through until that district chooses to release that individual teacher. A 9th grade teacher has been there for 7 years in our district, very successful. His wife has been ill, decided that for health purposes, she needed to move to Morro Bay. He's in a situation right now where over the winter break, they moved. He's honoring his contract and is going to finish the year. But things like that happen. So we lose people for different reasons, as well as the rehire and majority of the challenge. I think we're a great training ground because we lose the teachers that are underprepared, underqualified. Once they're credentialed, they get a job in a neighboring district that's closer to them. While they're working on their credential, the commute is fine. But after they're fully credentialed and they got some experience because of the work that we're doing to coach them up and train them up, then they move on. So we acknowledge that that's kind of our role as a small rural district, is to prepare teachers and contribute to the larger field of education while we compete with the 4th largest district, Fresno Unified, who broadcasts teacher recruitment at the movies when you're sitting there eating popcorn. All of a sudden there's a big old recruitment ad running there, and like, well, that's pretty creative. And then you open the Fresno Bee and there's a big old quarter-page recruitment ad. Oh, gee, it's like Christmas. You can go Christmas shopping earlier in the year. Now you can go teacher recruiting earlier in the year as well, but I don't know how early you can do that. But that's happening, right? Teacher fairs, there's more districts competing for applicants than there are applicants looking for jobs. And then we interview and hire, and we'll sign a contract on the spot if we can do a background check that quick on a conditional hire that there's no red flags. Here's the other problem though. 2 weeks later, they might get an offer somewhere else, and they just call us up and say, you know what, I changed my mind. So the contract is another challenge. It used to be that they would honor the contract until the year was over. I think those days are gone. Maybe that's something that we also have to look at as well. I can share more, but I'll stop right there and pass it on to someone. Thank you. I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to share this. I feel kind of embarrassed a little bit disclosing some of this information, but that's our reality, and I appreciate the opportunity to do that because that's really a reality that a lot of districts, large and small, are facing.
Well, thanks for sharing all that. And you have nothing to feel embarrassed about. We're pleased to have you here. So I wanted to ask Rick Pratt, what is the state doing to fix this, and are there any limits to what the legislature can do?
Well, I think that there are two categories of responses, or possibly policy responses. One would deal directly with the teacher supply issue, and then the other deals with teacher retention. And I think both are at work here in this overall teacher shortage. And we spent a lot of time talking about teacher supply, but I actually think that teacher retention is probably more amenable to some kind of meaningful and effective policy intervention. And we used to have a program here in California, we still do, it's no longer state funded, that was very rigorously researched, and both before and after the program was implemented, and you probably are familiar with the Beginning Teacher Support and Assessment Program, BITSA. And it's really critical because, last December, I learned from CalSTRS that only 40% of new teachers actually vest in the system, which means that there's an attrition rate of 40% in the first 5 years, which actually is better than it used to be. It used to be 50%. So we're looking at a 40% attrition rate. At the same time, we know from our experience with programs like BITSA that a good induction program can actually result in more of a 90% retention rate. Of course, we don't want 100% because we don't want poor, ineffective teachers to be retained, but 90% is pretty good and certainly much better than what we have. It saves the state, or it helps to protect the state's investment in the preparation of new teachers, and it could go a long way toward resolving the teacher shortage, at least in the short term. We're looking at this pretty seriously, and I can tell you, and I just got permission from Patrick O'Donnell, who was here, because last week on his behalf I took language into council that would restore state funding for BITSA on an ongoing basis. And I know that runs a little bit against the grain of the local control funding formula because under that program and system we give school districts as much unrestricted dollars as we can and then let them spend them in accordance with local priorities. The problem is that local decision makers will prioritize expenditures that have local benefit. They're less likely to prioritize expenditures where the benefits are primarily external to the locality. And I think you can make that case for BITSA because, it's a statewide issue. That's why you're all here, right? The teacher shortage. And so I think that there is a compelling state interest to restore funding for that program on an ongoing basis, and we're going to take a stab at that. On the other side, if you look at the teacher supply, we are, there are a lot of things on the table. We're looking at things like Apple, which has already been mentioned. The problem with that is that it's really hard to tell what you're really incentivizing. Are you really encouraging more people to go into the profession, or are you paying people or providing a benefit for people who would have gone into the profession anyway? And of course, with any incentive, the bigger the incentive is, the more effect it's going to have. And so a bigger incentive does have the effect of encouraging more people who otherwise may not have gone into the profession, but it also has the effect of providing a bigger benefit to people who would have gone into the profession anyway. In the past, what we've done is we've tried to provide loan forgiveness for teachers who agree to teach in a hard-to-staff or a low-performing school. That actually conflicts with other state policy and priority. Think back to the QIA, the Quality Education Investment Act, where what we tried to do there was encourage teachers to staff low-performing, hard-to-staff schools with more experienced teachers. So you've got a situation where if you're going to have a state program to get brand new teachers into these same schools that you want more experienced teachers to be in, there's sort of an internal conflict there with state policy. There are other ways of slicing it, however. You can provide incentives such as loan forgiveness for spot shortages. And I know that the teaching shortage is really across the board these days, but if it's more acute in areas like special education, maybe you could target incentives to special education. Or if it's more acute in certain areas of the state, geographic areas of the state, you might be able to target incentives for teachers who would agree to teach in those areas. But there's another issue that we really haven't talked about, and last week I did just a little bit of looking at what teachers' salaries look like compared to the kind of salaries that you could make if you were not a teacher, and whether or not teacher salaries have actually kept pace with salaries in general in the state of California. So, and I drew from Department of Finance, the National Center for Education Statistics, and one or two other sources. And so between the year 2000 and 2013, California per capita personal income went up 44%. So in that same 13-year time span, California household income went up 30%, and the average California teacher salary went up 6%. So I don't know how big an incentive has to be to overcome those kinds of numbers. And in fact, between 2009 and 2013, average teacher salaries in California dropped by 5%. So we do have more money coming in. We've got the local control funding formula, which, it could be the kind of thing where the labor market takes care of itself. Districts are just going to have to start offering more dollars, more money, higher salaries to recruit the teachers they need. Two issues with there. One is that we have to keep in mind that under the governor's budget proposal, next year, we will still only be funding 95% of our LCFF targets. So while money has been coming in, we are still short of fully funding the local control funding formula. The other issue there is that, as you know, the local control funding formula dollars come in basically three pots, right? There's one pot for the base grant, there's another pot for supplemental funding, and there's another pot for the concentration factor, and those second two pots are based on the number and percentage of low-income foster youth and English learners you have in your district. And the money is there to, quote, improve and increase services for those students. So throughout California now, I'm sure you're aware, there is a tension taking place between how much of that money we can apply to increase teacher salaries and how much really needs to go to new programs or improved programs specifically targeted to those students. So we're funding the formula at 95% of targets, and not all the money is readily available for teacher salaries. So I know back in the 1980s, and Jack O'Connell authored a bill as an incentive and actually provided funding to increase beginning teacher salaries. That might be another thing that we need to look at in California. But I think that it's a critical issue to look at because there's what's happening with teacher salaries in California compared with salaries across the board is a real steep hill for any kind of an incentive program to climb.
I just want to quickly remind everyone that there are cards on the table, so if you have questions, please write them down, and there will be people walking on the aisles. You can pass them over if you have questions to ask the panel.
Thanks so much for that reminder. I wanted to ask Professor Gandara, once we figure out this, we're like a dog chewing its leash right here. One sec, let me get this over here. All right, it's stuck. Well, that's cool. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, how do you get buy-in at the ed school level for the need for more bilingual educators? How do you really push this issue?
Well, I think it'll go a long way to pushing the issue if the voters in California decide they want to expand bilingual programs. I think that would send out a signal across the state that we're open for business with bilingual teachers. But how do we increase the interest in doing so? You have to have positions that allow teachers to use the skills that they have. And we've had mounting evidence particularly over the last decade, that shows that there's not only achievement advantages for the children who are educated bilingually, there's cognitive advantages, there's labor market advantages, there's social advantages. It's just a good thing to do for children, and we have right now an enormous demand building up of parents who want their children, English-speaking parents, who want their children in dual language programs. We can't mount those programs because we don't have the teachers. So I think that we're going to be hearing more and more from English-speaking middle-class families who want this for their kids, and pressing on the system to provide the teachers to be able to do it.
Thanks. And as I promised, we have moved into the solutions part of this panel. So I wanted to ask Lynn, what are some solutions, what are some strategies that work for making being a special education teacher more appealing?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to say I don't think that we can fix this issue by just focusing on special education alone. That's very clear. We know that, a large percentage, somewhere around 60% nationally, are receiving services. Students with disabilities are receiving services in the general education classroom. So this isn't just about special ed. And if you reflect back to the reasons why special educators are leaving, it really has a lot to do with the infrastructure in schools and the way we're providing services to students with disabilities, or the lack of ability to work collegially and collaboratively with their in the general education classrooms to support students. So I think it's important to think about it that way as well. And as you saw in the report, and we'll continue to hear today, there's not a Band-Aid approach. It needs to be a very comprehensive and strategic approach if we're really going to impact the recruitment and retention issues we're having in special ed. I'm going to couch my responses really into some examples that are happening in California relative to a project that I get a chance to work on. I don't specifically work in California, but I do work with other states. It's called the CEDAR Project, and I always have to look at the acronym because I think I'm a little bit acronym deficient, but it's Collaboration for Effective Educator Development, Accountability, and Reform. There's brochures out there if you're interested, but California is a recipient of that opportunity, and it's offered by the Office of Special Education Programs. And it's designed to have the state and the preparing programs and local districts come together to work towards solutions in the preparation of teachers of students with disabilities and leaders. And that's not just about special education preparation, this is about general and special ed. And if you reflect upon the Special Education Task Force that was part of the CTEC Commission to look at shortages, there were a number of things that resonated and will resonate too as I share examples. But one is ensuring that all means all, and that there's a shared ownership for all students. I think it's fair to say that we all have an invested interest in the quality of the teachers in our classrooms, clearly, right? At the state level, at the local level, at the preparing program level. However, we don't always have the infrastructure to really support educators, either in the preparation or as they're in places in schools where they need additional preparation. But I think there's a lot that is happening that will really help us get there. So there's three things that I like to think about. I think about collaboration and partnership. That's not new. And how is that different for special ed? And let me give you an example. What we're starting to see happening, and some people call them blended programs, some call them dual licensure. I think it doesn't matter what it's called. You have to look at, what is it that's actually happening? And what we're starting to see at Cal Long Beach, as an example, where they're really working across general ed, faculty, arts and sciences, special ed, leadership, to develop coursework where cohorts are going through together. They're seeing modeling of general ed and special ed teachers working together. They're working hard. They've developed over the last couple of years an urban dual credentialing program to really think about, how well do we prepare our educators to serve in these urban contexts, and then the partnerships that they have with the local districts to ensure that there are field experiences or clinical experiences, however you look at it, but really opportunities for the candidates to really learn and be coached in their skill, as well as to collaborate with one another in a classroom. The other thing that I think about is partnerships in terms of meeting the supply and demand need in terms of the reality of the world right now, and that we just don't have the teachers. So really having the universities coming forward if we are hiring somebody who's underprepared or underqualified, which honestly we're in a position of having to do that in many cases, ensuring that we're investing in the professional learning system from there. And there's places like Cal State Fresno who are going into the schools, supporting having their classes provided within the K through 12 buildings, helping those teachers get their clear credential so that they can be credentialed. So there are some innovative stuff that's happening that could really be scaled up across the state. The other thing I think about is leadership. Ensuring that leaders have the right skills and capacity to really support an inclusive building or an inclusive environment. And I look at leadership preparation programs, oftentimes the standards really just require that the special ed leader or the leader really understands special ed law. Basically, how do we keep ourselves out of legal entanglement? But it's really more than that. How do you create these kind of environments where everyone shares the ownership of all kids? And how do you ensure that the teachers and the leaders have the skills to be able to do that well? And I applaud California with your teacher performance expectations that were recently revised, and I'm not sure if they're finalized, but really trying to integrate in skills for teachers and leaders to operate effectively in a multi-tiered system of support, to be able to provide differentiated instruction. Those are things that are critically important, and the two universities that have been working with CEDAR collaboratively the Loyola Marymount, and then also Fresno, as well as Brandman University, where they're really looking at coursework online for leaders. They're using some of the tools that are available through the CEDAR project to really take a look at what are those skills and competencies that leaders need in order to be able to have a successful inclusive building, and how are we making sure that those are integrated into coursework. And those universities are really working hard and working collaboratively to establish those. So I think there's some real opportunity here, and I know that I'm not giving enough time to the due diligence and the work that's been happening at these universities with the CEDAR project. They're presenting tomorrow at the Educator Excellence Summit, and they're going to be taping that, so I'm happy to share that with the group so you can hear more specifics about some of the innovation that's going on.
If I could just mention, if you think that we have a big problem with not enough bilingual teachers and not enough special ed teachers, we have a tremendous problem with not enough bilingual special ed teachers. And if you think about where you really need a teacher who can communicate with the family, who can bring the family in, there is no place where that is more important. So I would just like to have that on the table. In addition to which, LCFF funding can be used to help address that problem.
That's a really good point. Thank you. Assistant Superintendent Mendiola, so you told us a bit about the challenges that your district is facing right now. Well, you know, what you have right here is an amazing opportunity to talk about the help that you need. There are a lot of, movers and shakers in education policy in this room. So what can they do? What can the state of California and the legislature do to help you if you had a wish list on teacher recruitment and retention?
Well, I think, again, this is evidence of being on the right path. The thing is it happening soon enough? Because we really needed that planning process to take place earlier. We're having to react to our need in our community, and a lot of times it's without the knowledge of what's going on around us. So we're doing a lot of internal stuff. I mentioned the creative side of the teacher fairs now, where you're trying to get out there earlier and hope that they'll honor the terms of the contract. There could be some understanding that we kind of revert back to that. Once you start the school year, you would expect that teacher you start with is going to finish the year. My grandson, as a ninth grade student at the high school where he goes, different district, had 4 math teachers as a freshman as a ninth grader. My granddaughter at a separate school, middle school, 7th grade science, that teacher had a medical condition that prevented her from continuing. She was out the entire year. So that was an entire school year of rotating subs. So I think those are 2 areas. Try to get one teacher in there and put your support behind that teacher with training, but hope that teacher finishes the year, which I think that's probably better than the rotation of subs that are coming through, or the mid-year vacancies, which cause a scrambling and a backfilling, and it reverts back to the rotation of subs that continue rotating through. What we've begun to do in our district is when we hire those underprepared, underqualified teachers on emergency credentials, like I said, we have them. We released a number of them. 12 are coming back. They're doing good. They're on the right path. But now we're looking at teachers that are less prepared and less qualified than they are, and making them certificated tutors, and then we put them in team teaching situations or in situations where they're providing academic support for our students as part of that preparation pathway. We're kind of developing our own. I think that would help. I also think that our high school students that are in child development classes, we're in communication with West Hills, a local community college in our area, and looking at including an intro to teaching course for our high school students that are in that child development path. It'd be great to have, like the Apple program, say, you guys want to come back and teach in your community where you live? It's there for you. I know that at Fresno State, there's an effort to increase the college going rate, but I think that that could be complemented by, and especially for students that graduate with the intention of going back to their community, wherever it is, to teach. I also want to highlight that beyond the special ed EL challenges, speech, psychologist, it's even more difficult there. Administrators as well. So it's a broad field beyond the credential side of it. So I think those are ways that it would be helpful. I also think that teacher unions could, when they look at bargaining, it isn't so much the negotiation of what's going to benefit the more experienced members at the table, but it might be, let's pay attention to the start of this. Those other people that we're talking about now who aren't necessarily at the table and aren't able to get their interest on the table or in the negotiation process or in the contract, but typically they're the ones that are going to pick up that extra coaching job or that extra after-school tutorial opportunity, or they're going to be given those additional supervisory duties. So it might be that for a period of time, we can collaborate with the teacher unions and say, why can't we acknowledge that the needs of the people coming in terms of improving their working conditions are addressed, as opposed to whatever happens on the salary schedule at the other side, has to happen here. So if you try to do something to encourage recruitment, early recruitment, then that has to happen over here as well. I'm just saying that might be an area to look at. I don't know the details of that, but that's another possibility. I think the media campaign that can be launched to encourage people to get into teaching would be great. Too often we see the social media video where a principal maybe gets hit trying to break up a fight, or a teacher gets pushed trying to take away a kid's cell phone. There are some articles that are coming out where campus security officers are comparing their job to correctional officers. That's not going to help us in any way. So we got to have an alternative message for the public to receive and see. I think in our community we're doing pretty well. We work pretty close with Firebaugh PD. But we also have hard to fill positions that we just don't fill. Library media specialist, vacant. The science, high school chemistry, physics teacher, we couldn't find anybody. So we just had to eliminate that class. For the media specialist, we ended up bringing a classified person and contracting with the county office for support. The EL coach that we wanted for the high school, that teacher left because her husband relocated. This was over the summer. And we scrambled to try to find somebody else, not fully prepared or qualified. She agreed to come on over, accepted a job with another teacher somewhere. That's another vacancy in our district. So that's just another couple of examples. But I think what I said earlier might be something that could be added to some of the recommendations. I think the report was well done. The recommendations seem to be right on point. I went through the Apple program. I'm a strong supporter of the Apple program. So I think that would probably wrap up some of my thoughts at this point.
Thanks so much for all those ideas. So we are running out of time, so we're going to make this a lightning round. Ready, set, go. Rick, how can or should the state be able to intervene in particularly acute shortages under the framework of LCFF?
Well, I think, just to repeat something that I said earlier, I think we have to recognize that the local control funding formula, the whole theory, incentivizes decision-making at the local level to prioritize expenditures that have a local benefit. There are some priorities that have a statewide benefit that may be more external to the local school boards that are making decisions. And so I think that we need to recognize that there is a place for programs that could be targeted to statewide priorities such as the teacher shortage.
Thanks. And on to audience questions. I have a card here for Rick and Roy. Districts can grow their own with encouraging their paras to go into teaching. Is there talk about reinstating the money for this with a para program that provides funding for college tuition? Paraprofessionals, is there talk of a program to reinstate tuition relief?
I don't know, that's interesting, because about 30 years ago or 25 years ago, I actually wrote that program, and when I was wearing a different hat. And one thing that we do know about career ladder programs for paraprofessionals is that teachers who began as paraprofessionals actually have a much, much higher retention rate than other teachers. So, getting back to the retention issue, you're more likely to, if you look at your paraprofessionals as a potential pool of new teachers. A lot of paraprofessionals are working in special education, so they can move into a certificated teacher. A lot of paraprofessionals are bilingual, so they can deal with that issue. So I continue to think that it would be a good idea to try to ramp up that program and encourage more paraprofessionals to become certificated.
And I know this is lightning, but just to add to that, that has been a strategy that's been used with special education shortages, is to recruit the paraprofessionals to move into that field. And it has seen success because you can already tell they have the disposition, the skills, the competencies built in them that can be further supported for them to be a teacher of record. Yeah, exactly.
And we have another one for Rick. How are short-term staff permits and provisional intern permits being monitored, and who's reviewing them for the state?
That I actually don't know, but I know that we're taking a look at all kinds of things in terms of both long-term and short-term solutions, and so I think that would fall into the category of a short-term solution, along with maybe another idea that's been floated is reducing the earnings cap for retired teachers who want to come back and teach, maybe either as a substitute teacher or maybe as a mentor teacher as part of a the BITSA program. And so all of those things are on the table.
Great. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you so much for taking the time to address this question, and thank you for all of your questions. We are going to break for a little bit, so we will see you after. Thanks.